Welcome to the newest episode of Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. I'm your host, Jason Fraley, picking the brains of the top filmmakers, musicians, and artists of our time. Karla Bonoff brings her Home for the Holidays tour to the Birchmere in Alexandria, Virginia on December 11th. I spoke to the singer-songwriter about recording hits like Somebody's Eyes on the Footloose soundtrack and writing hits for other artists like Bonnie Raitt, Linda Ronstadt, Aaron Neville, and Winona Judd. Hey, Karla Bonoff. Hey, thanks so much for joining us on WTOP.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, we're talking because you're coming to the Birchmere in Alexandria, Virginia, legendary spot. It's going to be on December 11th, and you're calling it the Home for the Holidays tour. Is it true this is your first holiday tour you've ever done?
It is. I made a holiday album during COVID 2 years ago, just kind of for fun, and it ended up coming out pretty good. And so we thought we'd take it out on the road.
And that album was called Silent Night. So give us a teaser of if our listeners hear this and come out to the Birchmere expecting to hear some holiday tunes, what are some of the songs that they might hear on the set?
Well, also Livingston Taylor is sharing the stage with me, so we will be doing some things together, and I'll probably be doing the Christmas song and River and In the Bleak Midwinter and an original song, and we're going to do some holiday favorites together, and we'll probably do some of our own songs too, so people it's not 100% Christmas music.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You'll get enough to get in the holiday spirit, all the Christmas tunes and everything, but they'll also hear, the quote greatest hits that they love to come see you anyway.
Exactly.
Cool. And you and Livingston Taylor, singer-songwriter, you go way back, right? You've been friends for a while.
Oh yeah. I mean, we've all started out together in the 70s and been circling around each other for years and playing shows, and I opened up for James a bunch of times, so we all go way back.
Well, speaking of going way back, I always, whenever I have a legend on like yourself or a famous singer-songwriter, I always want to hear sort of how you got into this racket to begin with. It's like, so, where did you grow up? What kind of music was going on around the house? And how'd you get bit by the bug? That's what I want to know.
Well, I think because I grew up really pretty much 20 minutes from the legendary Troubadour Club, in the late 60s and early 70s, there was so much music happening and so many acts coming through and playing clubs and concerts. And so I really had this incredible exposure to all of that. Plus, I grew up in kind of a musical family. At least we were encouraged to play piano, and I was encouraged to play guitar or any instruments I wanted to play, and I was given lessons. And so I think between that and just growing up during an incredible musical time, I mean, growing up with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Motown, just formed my musical palette. And then when the kind of folk music thing started, the singer-songwriter thing, sort of late 60s, then it all just kind of gelled together, really. And I started playing at the Troubadour on these open mic nights they had on Monday nights. And that's where it all began, really.
So it was the whole Troubadour scene that really did it. All right. And didn't you, before you released that your own breakthrough album in 1977, didn't you also start singing background vocals for Linda Ronstadt?
Sometimes, yeah. I was in a band with Kenny Edwards, who was in the Stone Ponies with Linda, and Andrew Gold and Wendy Waldman. So we would often, help do background vocals on Linda's albums, and vice versa. She sang on mine as well. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
But I didn't really tour with anyone doing that, though. No.
Right. But people did hear your songs that you wrote. At least 3 of them, I think, on Linda Ronstadt's 76 album, Hassin' Down the Wind. I think you had Someone to Lay Down Beside Me, Lose Again, If He's Ever Near You. So what was it like, seeing songs that you wrote, being recorded by, such a famous artist? Linda Ronstadt's a legend now, and that was do you consider that sort of your first big break?
Well, actually, Bonnie Raitt recorded one of my songs a little bit before Linda did. She recorded a song called Home. So that was kind of the turning point, but it all kind of broke loose. Linda decided to do, I think, Lose Again first, and then she was making an album and she just kept asking me for more. And all of a sudden it turned into her doing 3 songs, which was pretty incredible for me, because I'd been just working and writing and, kind of struggling for like 10 years. And then all of a sudden, she did 3 songs and she was really at kind of the peak of her career. So it was pretty amazing for me. It really, everything shifted after that. And I think it brought a lot of attention to my album too. I recorded the same song. So there was, sometimes a little bit of confusion, but I think for the most part, it was really good for me.
Now, you mentioned the Bonnie Raitt Home, that she covered your song Home. And by the way, I do want to get into your album, your first album, on your own too. But real quick, since you mentioned Bonnie Raitt, what was it like working with Linda versus Bonnie, having them cover your stuff? Like, did you think one fit? I can't even ask you that. That's not fair to say. Did one fit the song better than the other one? Because I'm sure you respect both artists. But if you could compare and contrast them.
I mean, those are apples and oranges. You can't, first of all, they recorded different songs and they're so different. So I think they're both incredible women singers. And so, how lucky was I to get those 2 women to be singing my songs when my songs were new to people? I mean,
yeah. But do you remember where you were when you came up with those songs yourself? Now we're talking Karla Bonoff, the original do you remember where you were when you recorded those?
I remember writing them in a funky old house in the San Fernando Valley. We had a rented piano in the garage because it wouldn't fit in the house anywhere. It was very cold and the water would kind of leak in there, but I'd go out and put my jacket on and play that piano. And I think I wrote all 3 of those songs actually in that house. It was a rented house that cost $200 a month and 4 of us lived there.
I love it.
The days when you could rent a whole house for $200 a month.
That's bonkers. That boggles the mind nowadays. But
right.
Inflation, man. All right. So Karla Bonoff, the first album, that's the self-titled debut album in '77. That also had what Isn't It Always Love was on there too, and Lynn Anderson covered that later. So man, you're getting all the greats covered in your stuff. But tell me about putting together that first debut album. Was that in the house that you're speaking of?
Yes, actually it was. And then later on in another house. But, Kenny and Edwards and I had been making demos of those songs and he'd recorded them with Linda and recorded them with me. And so we'd done a lot of homework on those songs, plus the other ones that were on my first record. So when we went in the studio, we were really ready to make that record. And it was really a question of just calling in the great musicians that we were able to have, Russ Kunkel and Lee Sklar and Waddy Wachtel. And, those guys come in, you play a song once or twice and they are just with you, in the most amazing way without rehearsals at all. So that's how we would do those records and just track them, a song a day or 2 songs a day. And, then later on, I'd go back and do the vocals and stuff. But I had, almost, I would say, my whole life to prepare for my first record, and then not very much time to prepare for my second. That's how it goes,
Yes, so many musicians I've interviewed. It's funny you say that. They all say the same thing, that you have your whole life to write the first one, and then like 6 months or something to write the second one usually. So what was it like then putting out that sophomore one, The Restless Nights in 1979? How were you maturing, evolving? Or let's put it this way: if Karla Bonoff from Restless Nights was giving advice back to Karla Bonoff of the first album, what would she say?
Well, I mean, one of the things that changed was after my first album, I was extensively on tour, and when you sing every night, perform every night, all of a sudden your voice gets better, and your interpretation of songs gets better. I really hadn't had that much experience performing live. So I think when I went to do my second one, I felt like a much better singer, for one thing. And so I think that was probably the biggest change, but there certainly was pressure because you do your first record and then they put you on the road and you're out on the road for 6 months or so. And then you come back and you need to make another album. And I really had only 1 or 2 songs that I'd written during that touring time. So, there was a lot of pressure to just write quickly and get back in the studio because the label really wanted to have a record every year or at the most 2. So I think I got it out by 2 years later.
Yeah, just under the wire as far as the label was concerned. uh,
Yeah.
and then number three, Wild Heart of the Young in 1982. I mean, that one, personally was a pretty big mainstream hit off of that one. But had you settled into touring more? Like you said, it was a big kind of culture shock between the first and second album, all the touring you were doing. But by three, are you finding yourself? Are you kind of, hitting your sweet spot?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the touring, after that album, I went out and opened for James Taylor, which was, one of my greatest memories and so much fun for a couple months. And I was still learning, learning watching him or watching Jackson Browne, who I toured with after my first album. Being able to watch those guys every night and just take that in, very, really incredible for me. But by the third one, I think part of what I was dealing with then, and maybe other people like myself, was music was shifting in the 80s kind of to this more techno English rock thing. And kind of what we were doing was starting to fall out of favor for some reason, just wasn't the trend. So I found that it was harder then. I had a harder time with that record and it didn't really do as well. I think just because the environment was different, even though it had a hit on it. That song personally was not a song I wrote and really kind of wasn't like what I do. It was sort of an anomaly, compared to the rest of my music. So
Did Glenn Fry show you that one, or wasn't he
he
involved
did.
somehow? Yeah.
He did. Yeah. Glenn was a great collector of obscure R&B records. And he played me this record by Jackie Moore, who did it first and sometime in the early 70s. And I just thought it was such a cool song. So that's how I found it. Yeah.
Wow, cool. Well, so it sounds like you're saying you were very proud of the album and thought you were, continuing to, put out good stuff. Even if the music industry was shifting in a more techno direction, you were still
Right.
proud of it. All right, cool. Well, and then of course after that, most people will remember Somebody's Eyes. All movie fans, the Footloose soundtrack. Any good stories about putting together that one?
Well, it's so funny because my friend John Boylan was producing one of the songs for that record, and all those songs were written by Dean Pitchford with other people. Dean wrote the screenplay and the movie and all that stuff. So he just said, "Do you want to come in and sing this song?" And he sent me a copy of it. I listened to it for like 10 minutes, and then I went in the studio. I think I was there a half an hour. And that song is probably sold more than anything else I've ever done because Footloose has sold so many millions of copies. It's kind of hilarious that the thing I spent the least amount of work on actually made me a ton of money. It's just kind of crazy. So you never know.
You probably labored on forever that made no money for you.
Exactly. So I guess it all evens out somehow. It allowed me to it helped me kind of get through the lean years, and so I appreciate that a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, just getting on the soundtrack with all of those other, gosh, I mean, of course, the Kenny Loggins title song, Denise Williams had Let's Hear It for the Boy. There's so almost paradise. Like, you could go down and down, and there's so many good ones. And there you are right there with them. Did you, in addition to music fans listening to this interview, we also have a bunch of movie fans, myself included. So what did you think of Footloose just as a pure fan of watching it, as a movie?
I loved it. I thought it was really good. I thought everybody in it was really, think about it. John Lithgow. And it's had such a cool cast, and Kevin Bacon, who was new and dancing. And, I think it was a really good movie. It's obviously kind of like it's hung in there, it's been produced on Broadway and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I think that was one of that big breakout for Kevin Bacon. You're right, because before that he'd done Friday the 13th and Diner and stuff like that, like supporting roles. But I think that was his first big lead moment. Well, awesome. We've covered a lot, but I guess we might as well round it out and cover your other album, New World, because I know All My Life, the Aaron Neville duet was off of that one, and that was very well received.
Yes, it won a Grammy for Linda and Aaron for Best Vocal Performance. Yeah, I had kind of a break there where I was sort of searching, trying to figure out what to do, and then Columbia Records actually dropped me off the label sometime, I don't know, I forget, their 80 something. So I don't know, just kind of had kind of a weird period. And then I started writing again, and I made that record for Danny Goldberg's label, Gold Castle. And a lot of the songs on those, Linda recorded a couple of songs on that one too. So I kind of revitalized my career. She had a hit with All My Life, and Winona had a hit with Tell Me Why, and Linda also recorded Goodbye My Friend. So it wasn't a huge record for me, but it was a great, getting songs recorded by other people.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the Winona Judd hit. Tell Me Why. All of it, my wife included, we're huge country music fans, and so we grew up listening to that song. But so now that I have the actual songwriter, the pen that wrote those lyrics on this interview, how did you put that one together? Do you remember where you were when those words came to you? Because it's catchy as all hell.
I think it was just about some jerk I went out with. I don't even remember now.
I don't need to know the actual guy, but stringing together those phrases. I mean, do you sort of remember putting it together?
Not really, that's a long time ago. I mean, I think sometimes, when we were making records, as much as I just naturally would love to write, every song be a ballad, you kind of have to have something up tempo that you hope that radio will play. And so sometimes it's just a effort to go, God, I really need to write something sort of, up and perky. And that's kind of an effort for me sometimes. But I think Tell Me Why might have been one of those exercises where you're just going, okay, let's write something that can get played on the radio so that the rest of this album gets heard.
Right, exactly. All right, cool. Well, I know you also did Carry Me Home in 2019, and there was I guess that was like your first one back in a while. Like there was a hiatus there, and then you came back with that one. I guess why did you take such a big break? And B, were you pleased with the result?
Well, I did do something in between. I did a live album, I think in 2009 or somewhere in there, that with a full band. And then between that time and Carry Me Home, we lost Kenny Edwards, passed away. And I had been touring with Kenny and Nina Gerber and myself, the three of us. And when we lost Kenny, Nina and I just started kind of just doing it as a duo, really. And it sort of morphed into something that I thought was different than the way my other live stuff had sounded. So I don't know. I just thought one day we should just, I had a couple new songs and I had a Jackson Browne song I'd recorded, and we just went in on a weekend and just kind of played, kind of did a kind of reinvented sort of unplugged versions of all my songs. And, when you've been doing this for 30 or 40 years, it's nice sometimes to kind of document the way you're interpreting the songs today as opposed to 30 years ago. So that was part of my reason for wanting to do that, was to sort of say, this is what we sound like now, and this is what our shows are like, and just to stay updated, really.
Right. So if you want to get a taste of what your live shows are like, that's a good one to pick up, and you get a real sense of the modern sound.
Right.
All right, cool. Well, we've pretty much spanned the whole career, and I appreciate you, being so generous with your time. When the history is all written, and you have, clearly you have several more decades of music in you, so it'd be cool to see where else you go from here. But when you finally do reach the end and look back at the whole career, how do you want to be remembered, or how do you think you stand out from maybe some of your other contemporaries?
Oh, I don't know. That's a tough question. I think, my big influences really were, Judy Collins and Joni Mitchell and, Laura Nyro. And, I hope that, I took my influences like that and, and did something inspired and valuable with what they gave me and continued the legacy. That's really all I can say, because I'm grateful to all those women for their inspiration.
Yep, and I'm sure there's plenty of others that say the same thing about you, and young artists that you inspired as well. So that's great.
I hope so.
All right, awesome. Well, in the meantime, come check out Home for the Holidays, your first ever holiday tour. It's going to be at the Birchmere in Alexandria, Virginia on December 11th. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and you can find tickets at karlabonoff.com, and there's tickets to shows there, or I'm sure they can find the Birchmere online.
Yes, I believe it's birchmere.com. Hey, thank you so much for doing this, and happy holidays.
You too. Take care. Have a good one.
Thanks so much for listening to Beyond the Fame with Jason Fraley. Our theme music is Scott Buckley's Clarion. Remember to give us a 5-star rating if you like what you hear. We'll see you next time.
Explain your DNA on 10 cases, man.
You're inside the police interrogation room with the alleged Potomac River rapist.
I'm not guilty on any of this stuff.
So calm, so reasonable. Could this be the man who terrorized women for 9 years before murdering a brilliant scientist 2 decades ago? Experience one of the most fascinating true crime podcasts available. Join crime reporter Paul Wagner for Unknown Subject, Season 3 of WTOP's American Nightmare series. Search American Nightmare Podcast on all podcast platforms.
I wanted to take a second to tell you about an app I really enjoy. Living in the DC area is great, and Podcast DC gathers all of the local shows that I like all in one local app. Health, sports, local news, politics, and so much more. Podcast DC is the new local app with hundreds of DC area podcasts to choose from. I can earn exciting rewards just for listening and share the podcasts I love instantly. Available in the App Store or in Google Play, listen local with Podcast DC.